we speak, but we're also going to be looking at the effects of the American and Israeli joint attacks on the ground in Iran. That is going to determine the tone and the tempo of what happens next.
Matt Bradley in Tel Aviv, thank you. Stay safe. We want to bring back into the conversation NBC's Raf Sanchez. Raf, you have made the point this morning that this is really a situation with no parallel. We have seen plenty of other times in which the U.S. was essentially going at it alone, but this time is different with Israel by its side, a joint effort, a significant escalation after talks failed. Talk to us about what likely had to happen to lead up to that moment for Israel to feel that now is the time. After everything it has been through, after going through the October 7th attacks more than 2 years ago now, all of the after effects of that, and for the people of Israel to be willing to back this type of effort.
So, Laura, this is a moment of opportunity for the Israeli government, for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has been a decades-long opponent of the Iranian regime. There is, of course, decades of bad blood between Iran and Israel. We saw that play out with Israeli covert operations inside Iran, the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists, sabotage operations. We saw Iran backing proxy groups against Israel. But it is only in the last year, 2 years, that we have seen open conflict between Iran and Israel, Israeli strikes inside of Iran, Iran openly firing ballistic missiles. So there has been an opening in the possibilities in front of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has been someone who has wanted to see Iran's nuclear program reduced to nothing. He has been deeply, deeply concerned about the arsenal of Iranian ballistic missiles that have been built up in recent years. Guys, let me know if you want me to give way here. I think we're hearing sirens in Tel Aviv, but I'll keep going for now. An Israeli military official says that that arsenal of Iranian ballistic missiles numbers now in the high hundreds, low thousands. And so if you're Prime Minister Netanyahu and you have the backing of the United States, this is potentially a chance to take out what you see as an existential threat to your country. So Israel has obviously been through a lot since 2023.
Excuse my interruption. We want to confirm that these are live pictures right now as we've been going between pictures that just happened. This is a live look at Tel Aviv, Israel right now. You hear the sirens sounding. Our colleagues Richard Engel and Matt Bradley are there, as well as the Israelis. Our camera panning to the sky. The Israelis try to fend off incoming strikes from the Iranian regime right now in response to the U.S. and Israeli strikes earlier this morning. All of this happening in a rapid succession. The strikes by the U.S. and Israel happening within the last 6 to 7 hours. Now the sirens beginning to wane a bit. We have seen plumes of smoke throughout parts of that country over the course of this day. The Israelis not reporting any casualties that we are aware of yet. Here we have a better understanding of the circumstances because we have access, we have cameras there. In Iran, a different circumstance. There is a near total internet blackout, only about 4% of that country with access to communication means to share what they are experiencing and seeing on the ground there. Again, as we look at these live pictures, though, we just want to keep you up to date. Our team's in a safe place, having covered conflict in that area before. Those sirens give you about 60 to 90 seconds, sometimes less, to get to a safe location. Oftentimes, in their effort to share pictures with audiences here at home, our camera teams and our crews there use only the protection of some of those walls there to be able to capture the images. But as we look at the pictures, we have not seen any explosion take place there. Raf, I want to bring you back into the conversation, but just wanted to make sure our audience knew exactly what we were looking at in real time. But again, please continue your thought about the circumstances for Israel as it begins what's likely to be a lengthy involvement in a regional war.
Yeah, Peter, so just real quick, you mentioned we at this point are not seeing any signs of explosions in Tel Aviv. At a briefing that an Israeli military official conducted for reporters probably about 2 hours ago now, they said at that time while dozens of Iranian ballistic missiles have been fired at Israel, there were no significant impacts, in his words. So it seemed to be that the joint American-Israeli air defense system was holding, that it was fending off most of these ballistic missiles. We, of course, did see significant numbers of those missiles get through back in June, nowhere near as many as were fired, but we did see some of them get through Israel's sophisticated air defense systems, Iron Dome, of course, David's Arrow. So we will continue to monitor that. Just in terms of the broader situation here, Prime Minister Netanyahu has hoped for years and years and years to have an American president who was willing to use America's unique capabilities to target the Iranian nuclear program. He got that back in June when President Trump ordered those B-2 bombers to drop those enormous bunker buster bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities. Those are capabilities that Israel does not have, only the United States has. But even back in June, guys, it's worth saying it was a different situation. Israel went to war first. The United States remained on the sidelines for most of those 12 days. And then eventually President Trump gave the order. What we are seeing this time is a coordinated, from the get-go, joint American-Israeli military operation. And President Trump has set the goal about as maximalist as you possibly can. He is saying the goal here is regime change, that he has given the order, along with Israel, to launch a military campaign, and that it will eventually, when the bombing is over, be, in his words, in the hands of the Iranian people to rise up and to try to overthrow their government. And we will see whether bombs dropped from the air without ground troops will be enough to dislodge this regime that has held on to power by basically all means necessary since 1979. It's worth remembering, guys, they fought an enormously bloody war against Saddam Hussein's Iraq back in the 80s, millions of casualties on both sides. They didn't let go of power. They didn't let go of power in the face of these crippling economic sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. When the Iranian people have taken to the streets in protest many times in recent years, they have not hesitated to use lethal force. And so we will see whether this military campaign, which the United States is signaling could go on for days, could go on for weeks, will be enough to topple the regime. If it is not, guys, it is very unclear in these early hours, as the smoke is still literally hovering over Tehran and other areas, what the diplomatic off-ramp would be. If the U.S. and Israel are not able to dislodge the regime, if they get to a point where they feel that they are not able to continue this militarily, either because they just do not have the supplies and ammunition in the region, or because Iran is able to inflict enough damage regionally, then it will be very interesting to see how both sides climb down from this. I would say keep an eye on Turkey. Turkey has traditionally played a significant mediating role. We've seen that between Russia and Ukraine. The Turks have open lines of communication to Washington. They are a member of NATO, but they do also have open lines of communications to Iran. So it is very, very early days. We will see whether the U.S. and Israel can achieve these maximalist objectives that President Trump has set. If they are not able to, then people will start looking around trying to see what sort of diplomatic off-ramp there might be for both sides to climb down here. Guys.
Raf Sanchez in London for us this morning. Raf, thank you. I want to turn back to Julie Sirkin, who is traveling with the president from his West Palm Beach estate at Mar-a-Lago. Julie, just a short time ago, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, putting out a statement in support of this, saying Iran is facing the severe consequences of its evil actions, going on to say President Trump and the administration have made every effort to pursue peaceful and diplomatic solutions in response to the Iranian regime's sustained nuclear ambitions and development, terrorism, and murder, and going on here.
I'm going to interrupt you very briefly. While you've been introducing Julie Sirkin, they're telling us that right now we have a guest from Iran. Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi, is joining us now from Tehran. Minister Arachi, we appreciate your making time to speak to us right now. We have a series of questions. We know that you are one of the few in that country who have the access to communicate outside of a country where there is a large blackout of communications at this time. First and foremost, our question to you, sir, is can you give us a better understanding of the situation on the ground there, the impacts that have taken place? And separately, can you confirm to us that the Ayatollah and the president are both still alive?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, the situation on the ground is quite, I cannot say normal, but the life is going on. Everything is under control. I think Americans and Israelis failed to, access to hit their targets. And now everything is under control. And we almost in less than 2 hours, we were able to start retaliation by by attacking, American bases and some targets in Israel by our missiles. Almost all officials are safe and sound and alive. We may have lost 1 or 2 commanders, but that is not a big problem. We are actually managing it. We are handling the situation. And I was in contact with, my colleagues in the Persian Gulf. And I explained for them that, we have no intention to attack them, but we are actually attacking the American bases in the act of self-defense. We cannot just sit and watch they are attacking us and we don't, respond simply because their bases are in a friendly neighbor country. So I explained for them, and I hope that they understand this situation. Another point I have to mention is, I don't know why the U.S. administration insists to start a negotiation and then in the middle of negotiation attack, the other party. Today happened exactly what last June happened. We were in the middle of negotiations. And, and it was interesting that this time we made a big progress. 2 days ago, on Thursday, we had a very good meeting in Geneva, together with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And we were able to address serious questions related to Iran's nuclear program. We obviously have differences, but we resolved some of those differences and we decided to continue in order to resolve the rest of questions. And we actually instructed the technical team to go to Vienna and have a meeting with the IAEA. In order to find technical solution for the problems we are facing in the negotiation. And everybody was happy at the end of those negotiations. As you saw, His Excellency Badr al-Busaidi, the Foreign Minister of Oman, who is mediating between us, he concluded by posting a tweet saying that today we made significant progress. And before he posted his tweet, he consulted with both delegations and both were happy. So I don't know why, while we were progressing in our talks and we had made good, achievement, and a deal was at our reach, why they decided to attack us. Perhaps, it was others who dragged the United States for their own benefits into this, conflict. It's really pity. It's very unfortunate. And yes.
Mr. Arachi, I appreciate your comments there, and we do have a series of other questions I want to ask you. But just for clarity for our audience right now, can you confirm with specificity that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is alive, and separately that the Iranian president is alive right now following these American and Israeli strikes?
As far as I know, yes, they are alive. And the head of judiciary as well, the head of the Speaker of Parliament as well, all high-ranking officials are alive. And the Secretary of the National Security Council. So everybody is now in its position, and we are handling this situation, and everything is fine.
Sir, do you believe that you were targeted as part of these strikes?
You mean me?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. They have targeted everybody. Just now I saw the footages of their attack to a girl school in the city of Minab in the southern part of Iran. So 57 girls were killed by their strike. So when they strike a school, so they can also hit others easily. This attack was unprovoked, illegal, and absolutely illegitimate, and against the international law, and should be condemned. That is obvious.
You said that Iran is prepared to take self-defense towards these actions. What would that entail?
Well, we are facing an act of aggression, and obviously we have every right to defend ourselves. So what we are doing is act of self-defense, which is absolutely legal and legitimate. So, and we think that we are fully prepared for that, even more prepared than previous time, the 12-day war. And I believe we managed this. We know very well how to defend ourselves. We learned lots of lessons from the previous war, and we will certainly teach the aggressors a lesson they deserve.
Mr. Arachi, if I may ask you very quickly right now, we know that Iran, via the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, via its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, has carried out attacks on Americans, on others throughout that region. Iran insists that its nuclear program has never been with the desire to create nuclear weapons. But my question to you is, sir, why should the United States and why should the rest of the world trust Iran when it says its efforts to create a nuclear program are only for civilian use and not to continue to carry out harm against Western and American interests?
Well, first of all, we don't have proxies. There are certain groups who are fighting for a just cause, and we support them.
So that would make them a proxy, correct, sir?
Yeah. But they are not receiving orders from us. They are independent groups, but we support them, and we support them in their fight for the right of self-determination or to free their land from occupation, whatever. But for the time being, we don't need anybody for our defense. We are capable enough to defend ourselves, and we will do that, and we don't need the help of anybody. On our nuclear program, I think there are every reason that Iran does not want nuclear weapon. And the whole world has tested us when in 2015, we signed a deal and we announced very clearly that Iran would never seek, develop or acquire nuclear weapons. And that was a permanent commitment in 2015 deal. I know that President Trump doesn't like that deal, but at least we proved our goodwill, and we proved that we are not seeking nuclear weapons. And it was not Iran who withdrew from that deal, it was the US. And still in 2025, when the US offered us negotiation to find a solution for Iran's nuclear program, again, we accepted. We entered into negotiation in good faith. At least 3 times we came to a good conclusion, but my interlocutor in the other side couldn't sell it in Washington. Then they suddenly attacked us. Again, this time, we entered into negotiation with the help of our Omani friends and others. Everybody supported those negotiations. And, we made significant progress this time, and then they attacked us. So it is us who have, negative, bitter experiences from talking to the United States. We have never wanted nuclear weapon. There is both religious, convictions by us, the verdict by the Supreme Leader, who consider all these weapons as inhumane and, against the Islamic teachings. At the same time, they have no place in our security doctrine, and I can explain. But I would like to reaffirm once again that we have proved our goodwill. We negotiated with E3 and then E3 plus 3 or P5 plus 1, and we concluded a deal the whole world celebrated, and we remain committed to that deal in 2015. But it was the US who withdrew, not us. And again, the experiences of last year and this year. So I think the one who should prove its good faith, its goodwill, is the United States, not Iran.
Sir, as many Americans are waking up this morning seeing images of Israel and other nations try to defend itself, what is your message to the American people about how far Iran will go? Well, we have no limit to defend ourselves. Does that include attacking Americans?
Well, we are attacking the American military build-up in our region. We are not attacking Americans in their land. Americans are attacking our people in our cities. But this is not what we are going to do. We are attacking the Americans' bases, military bases in the region, and military installations and facilities. And this is only as an act of self-defense. We are not the one who started this aggression. It was the United States and Israel who started this aggression. So there is no limit for us to defend ourselves. But once the aggression is stopped, we would also stop our self-defense. This is quite obvious and quite natural.
Mr. Arachi, in recent weeks, we saw a crackdown by the Iranian regime on civilian protesters throughout that country. Depending on where you receive your information, hundreds or even thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Iranian people were killed. In this moment, for the Iranian people, will you commit that Iran will not crack down, will not attack, maim, or kill the people of Iran if they choose to protest peacefully against their government?
Well, I have to correct your disinformation. We didn't crack down the protesters, we cracked down a terrorist operation. And from 28 December to 7 January, we had peaceful protests in our streets, and that was absolutely tolerated. Even the government decided to engage with the leaders of those protests to find a solution for the problems they have faced. And everything was peaceful and nobody was killed. But on 8 January to 10, it was totally a different story. Armed elements added to those protests. They came from outside. They received instructions from outside, specifically from Mossad and Israelis, and they started shooting at our police and security forces. So it was completely a different story, a terrorist operation, and we had no way but to crack it down.
So for clarity, you're saying that those who were killed were exclusively foreign agents? None of them, is your claim, were Iranians?
Let me explain. Those elements entered into the demonstrations and protests, and they started shooting at our police forces, and then they started shooting at people, and it was very strange. And then they started even shooting at the protesters. Why? Because they wanted to increase the number of killings, because the President of the United States had said that if there are killings, I will come to rescue. So in order to drag him into a war with Iran, they started shooting at people, so they increased the number of, in order to increase the number of deaths. And the total number was, as we have said, 3,117, and the list of all victims have been already published by us. About 2,500 of which are considered by us as martyrs, ordinary people who were killed by these terrorist elements. 200 police forces. What do you do in the United States if somebody shoots at your police? You would certainly react very harshly. And this is what we did. And then it was, over in less than in 2.5 days. So please distinguish and separate between protesters, peaceful protesters in the streets, and then a terrorist operation, which was something else. So we consider those 3 days as a plot by Israelis and the continuation of 12-day war. So why they did it? Because last time in the war, in 12-day war, they saw that people came to the streets in support of the Islamic Republic. There was a social unity. in support of the system. This time they wanted to change the course, so they started with some riots in the streets. They gave weapons to certain elements to come and shoot people. So we would have this chaos, and then attack us. Exactly what is going on right now. So all of those were very well planned, plot by Israelis and Americans. But we were able to control that, operation, and we are able to defend ourselves this time. And you will see that how we can defend ourselves, and the world would see.
Sir, you heard likely the President of the United States talk about regime change in Iran this morning in his recorded statements. What is your message to the President?
Well, I think this is mission impossible. For regime change, you cannot do regime change while millions of people are supporting these so-called regime. You just look at what happened in the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. We had altogether about 30 million people in the streets in all cities of Iran in support of the Islamic Republic and in support of the whole system. So you cannot, change this regime because it's supported by the people. Yes, there are also people who are complaining, but they are strong supporters of the regime, of the system at the same time. And then we have a very well-established political structure, and they have tried regime change. This is not the first time that they want to do regime change. They have tried it in the past. Look, in the past 47 years, the United States has tried everything from coup, from sanctions, 8 years of war by Saddam Hussein, supported by the United States and many others, and then 12-day war, snapback, in the Security Council, and terrorist operations. They have tried everything, and all of them failed. And I don't know why they don't, understand their failures. So if they want to repeat a failed experience, they won't get any better result.
Then, sir, what is your message to the Iranian people? We understand that you describe the president's call for regime change as mission impossible. What is your message to the people of Iran right now? In your words, everything is under control, but based on what the world is seeing, there appears to be smoke coming up from a variety of different sites throughout Tehran. There appears to be some panic and real concern there. What do you tell the people of that country about the state of its government and the state of Iran broadly?
Well, I said everything is under control. I didn't say that there is no war. Of course there is war. Of course there is panic. Of course there are attacks to different buildings. Of course, about 60 students, girl students, have been killed in one school. Of course there are those things. But my message to my own people is that we are a great nation with a great civilization. We have lasted for thousands of years, and we know how to defend ourselves. We know how to deal with our enemies, and we will survive when we become more stronger out of this.
So when you hear the president say to the people of Iran, your freedom is your own, rise up, the United States will be with you, you say to them that's a hollow gesture?
Isn't that the intervention in the internal affairs of another country? If we had done so, what have you said? So the president of another country, no matter how powerful, has no right to decide for the people of another country, to order the people of another country what to do and what not to do. And this is what he did, by the way, in those terrorist operations. He was the one who set fires in the governmental buildings. Do this, do that. And now he's asking people to rise against their government. Has he any right to do that? I don't think so.
Sir, are there any back channel talks, any communications that are taking place right now, or are those done? And separately, can this be de-escalated, and how?
Well, there is no communication right now, but if Americans want to talk to us, they know how they can contact me. We are certainly interested for de-escalation. This is not our war. This is an imposed war against us. This is a war of choice by the United States, and they have to pay for that. And they do. But as far as we are concerned, we don't want war. We don't want escalation in our region. We are ready for de-escalation, but the aggression should be stopped first. The attacks should be stopped first, and then there is the possibility to talk, and we can consider that. I'm not promising anything because our people are very angry right now. So if the war is stopped, if the aggression is stopped, then we will see how we can, work for de-escalation.
Sir, just days ago, you had said that there had been a semblance of an agreement between the U.S. and Iran, and a way to avoid a war, if you will. What specific concessions was Iran not willing to give up?
Well, on our nuclear program, we made it clear for the American team that we are prepared to do everything in order to prove that our nuclear program is peaceful and would remain peaceful forever. What we are not prepared for is to give up our right. We are not giving up our right, including for enrichment, but we are ready to build confidence on our nuclear program, to make sure that our program is peaceful and would remain peaceful forever. For that reason, for that goal, we offered good concessions to the U.S. team when we met them last Thursday, 2 days ago. I may go into the details of those concessions in another program, perhaps, in order for the whole world to understand and for Americans to understand that we were progressing. We made significant progress. We agreed to do enrichment only based on our needs, the needs of Iranian people. I can tell you one of our needs. It is a Tehran research reactor. This is a small reactor, by the way, built by Americans before the revolution. And this reactor produces radioisotopes, medicines needed for nearly 2 million Iranians. So how we can give it up, how we can just stop this reactor? So we would continue our program based on our own needs. This is what we can do, and we are prepared to do that. And we can accept, robust verifications and monitoring by the agency, and we can even do some more confidence-building measures in order to, make sure, as I said, that everything would remain peaceful. So I see the possibility to, reach a deal which can guarantee that Iran's program is peaceful. At the same time, sanctions are lifted and economic cooperation can be, started, and we go for peace. And I don't know why the United States, why President Trump just missed that opportunity. Ask the Foreign Minister of Oman how close we were to get a deal.
Mr. Araghchi, if I may, we heard from the president first in his State of the Union address that took place on Tuesday and again this morning in recorded remarks that I'm sure you've heard. The president said, among other things, that Iran has been building missiles that, in his words, could soon reach the American homeland. So as it relates to Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, does Iran now have the capability to reach the U.S. homeland? How far removed is it from that capability?
No, we don't have that capability. We have intentionally kept the range of our missiles below 2,000 kilometers. So we don't have that capability, and we don't want to do that because we don't have any hostility against, the United States people or Europeans or whatsoever. We have built that capability in order to defend ourselves against our enemies. And our missiles proved to be the most reliable means of defense for us. So obviously we cannot compromise on our missiles because our security depends on them. So the more, the U.S. administration, the more Europeans or whoever insists that Iran should disarm itself from those missiles, the more we are convinced that in order to protect ourselves, we need those missiles. So our missiles have defensive nature. Our missiles is only for deterrence and defense. They are not for aggression. And nobody has any record of any aggression by us against our neighbors in the past 200 years.
So for clarity, you said that your missiles cannot reach the United States by design, that you do not want to reach the United States, but you also said it would be necessary as a defensive vehicle that you could if necessary. So to be clear, are you committing that Iran is not and will not build missiles that would have the capability to reach the United States?
I can confirm, yes.
Sir, if that's a red line for you, why is attacking U.S. military bases abroad justified?
Well, because they are attacking us. They are U.S. military, installations, facilities, bases who are attacking us. We are under attack. Why don't you, recognize this fact? We are under the attack by U.S. forces in the region. So we have every right to defend ourselves. And how to defend ourselves? We attacked, the U.S. bases. This is obvious. This is a very simple fact. And I hope that, and I'm sure that people would understand that. We are not the one who attacked Americans. We are only defending ourselves.
Did these attacks that were carried out by the U.S. and Israel today destroy Iranian missile bases?
Well, I don't think so, because, we are firing our missiles almost every hour.
Did it destroy any missile bases there?
Well, I don't know. I have no detailed information yet. But as I see, only 1 hour after the U.S. attacks, we started to launch missiles, to hit targets in Israel and in U.S. bases. That means that our capability is there, and we have enough capability, we have enough strength to continue this as long as needed. I am telling this with confidence. We are more prepared than previous war, quantity-wise and quality-wise.
Mr. Araghchi, we have heard from many foreign leaders throughout the world, among them from the Kremlin. We have heard from Russia. We are beginning to hear from other nations elsewhere. What, if any, communications has Iran had from some of its allies, many of them viewed as adversaries to the United States, around the world, about what they are committed to do at this time?
Well, I had a good conversation with my Russian counterpart. I also talked with my colleagues in the region, with Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all those GCC countries. And, my mission is to end the war. This is my mission as foreign minister, to end this unprovoked war against us. And we are in close contact with our friends in Russia and China and others in the region. And I am prepared to work on any idea which is, just and reasonable and can help, helping this war, ending this war with pride, of course.
Mr. Abbas Araghchi is the foreign minister of Iran. Mr. Araghchi, we appreciate your perspective and coming to speak with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, we should detail parts of the headlines in that remarkable conversation with the foreign minister of Iran, who is in Tehran as we speak, saying, among other things, when you asked him about the president's call for regime change, he said simply, that is mission impossible. Separately, he said that, in his words, everything is under control. He acknowledged that that doesn't mean that they are under attack, that there is not, he agreed there is panic and real concern in the country. And beyond that, he made very clear that in his view, in the view of the Iranians right now, this was an aggression by the United States, where, in his words, Iran was acting in good faith to try to find an end to these tensions when the United States struck. We've heard from the president in his own words in that 8-minute set of remarks that he delivered as a pre-recorded statement early this morning.
And we should be clear for people who may not be aware, the foreign minister is somebody who was intimately involved in all of the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran in recent weeks, saying that he thought there had been a semblance of an agreement, but now calling what has happened an act of self-defense, saying that the attacks on U.S. military bases abroad in that region are essentially justified, but also, at least from a messaging standpoint, Peter, seeming to want to distance himself from any effort to have any attacks on Americans living here in the United States, clearly making it, at least again, from a messaging perspective, that is not a place that they seem to want to go right now.
And you think about the remarkable nature of that conversation, that interview happening even as attacks continue on his country right now, a lot of which requires some fact-checking. American intelligence will have a very different perspective, obviously, on a lot of this, including when the foreign minister, Arachi, said, among other things, that those who were killed during the recent crackdown, those Iranian civilians, innocent civilians, in many cases, he insisted, in many cases were foreign agents. They were members of Mossad. That means the Israeli special forces, their CIA, in effect, right now, when in fact we have seen the reporting publicly from those in the region that many innocent civilians, as it turns out, perhaps thousands of innocent civilians, were among those killed here. We have been following this morning's developments out of Iran and getting a reaction from around the world this morning.
Peter and I are now going to hand off our coverage to our colleague, Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker in Washington, on what has been a historic morning. Kristen, good morning to you.
Peter and Laura, good morning to both of you. Fantastic job with the Iranian foreign minister. It is 9:30 a.m. on the East Coast, just about 8 hours after that massive operation by the U.S. and Israel, striking targets inside Iran. Iran has already started to retaliate, targeting U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have also been heard in northern Israel and Dubai. President Trump released a pre-recorded statement on Truth Social just after the strikes began, where he called the attack a, quote, massive and ongoing operation, and saying, quote, we are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. And notably, he's openly calling for regime change, asking the Iranian people to topple their government. We do want to let you listen in to more of what the president had to say in that pre-recorded message, and then we will turn to our team of correspondents and analysts fanned out all across the globe. First, let's take a listen to President Trump's pre-recorded message.
It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again. They can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces and no longer use their IEDs or roadside bombs, as they are sometimes called, to so gravely wound and kill thousands and thousands of people, including many Americans. And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. It's a very simple message. They will never have a nuclear weapon. This regime will soon learn that no one should challenge the strength and might of the United States Armed Forces. I built and rebuilt our military in my first administration, and there is no military on earth even close to its power, strength, or sophistication. My administration has taken every possible step to minimize the risk to U.S. personnel in the region. Even so, and I do not make this statement lightly, the Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. We pray for every service member as they selflessly risk their lives to ensure that Americans and our children will never be threatened by a nuclear-armed Iran. We ask God to protect all of our heroes in harm's way, and we trust that, with his help, the men and women of the armed forces will prevail. We have the greatest in the world, and they will prevail.
And we have got team coverage of the U.S. military action against Iran with correspondents and analysts fanned out all across the globe. I want to begin with NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who joins us now from Tel Aviv. Richard, there are sirens going off as we speak?
There are sirens going off as we speak, and there are interceptions underway. If the camera pans up, you can see some smoke in the sky. So it looks like at least one, perhaps two incoming Iranian missiles were targeted by Israel's air defense systems just moments ago. And because of the altitude, you often hear the explosion of the interceptor missiles a short time afterwards. So it is possible that while we were speaking in the next few seconds, right, there was a faint thud, so quite high. Actually, more than one. I think a lot of explosions. The most intense barrage that I've heard all day. I think there must have been just 10, 15, 20 explosions, and they are still ongoing. So it appears that there has just been a very significant barrage of missiles fired at Tel Aviv. Based on what I'm hearing right now, this would be the most significant barrage of missiles that has been fired at this city since this conflict, since this round of fighting began this morning when Israel and the United States launched what it's describing as a preemptive attack. So not just one or two interceptions, but a whole series of interceptions, quite a distance from downtown Tel Aviv. But based on the number of, and they're still going on, but based on the number of explosions we're hearing right now, it seems like it was quite a significant barrage and still ongoing.
Richard, you and I have been talking about the possibility of this military action taken by President Trump, Israel, for quite some time. And now here it is. It appears as though it is robust. It's going to be extensive. Talk about what you are hearing in terms of the size and the scope of this military action that is now underway, Richard.
Well, right now, we can't see it. So it is not happening right over downtown Tel Aviv, but we could hear what sounds like rolling thunder on the outskirts of this city. So a major Iranian assault was apparently incoming toward Israel just since we've been speaking for the last few moments. This has been happening all day, not on this scale. What happened here in Israel this morning, people woke up around 8 o'clock in the morning to air raid sirens, to word that this surprise attack had begun, that it was initiated by Israel and the United States, targeting multiple locations, military facilities, political leaders, military leaders in Iran, and that Iran quickly responded, but not only firing at Israel, like what we just saw, but firing at U.S. installations across the Middle East. And already on day one, and day one is not even over here, 9 different countries are involved in this conflict. Saudi Arabia just being the latest country to confirm that it was hit by an Iranian attack, which it condemned. But already we have Israel and Iran directly involved. You have Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and the latest confirmation, Saudi Arabia. A regional conflict is spreading on this first day of what could be an open-ended military campaign, because President Trump laid out his objectives, which you just broadcast, when he's talking about decimating the Iranian government and the Iranian military so severely that the people are able to rise up on the streets and overthrow the government. That's what President Trump described as his objective. But also an extraordinary moment, Christian. You just heard on our air the Iranian foreign minister speaking live, appearing quite calm, appearing quite in control of his position, saying that Iran, even with all of this going on right now, is willing to de-escalate and return to the negotiating table. I spoke to a senior Arab leader, a leader from one of the countries that was attacked today, and I asked him if he thought there was a possibility at this stage for a de-escalation, for an off-ramp, and he responded quite quickly with a one-word answer: no.
Let me ask you, Richard, before I let you go, we also heard from the Iranian foreign minister this scathing charge. He said, quote, "This is a war of choice by the United States." That is undoubtedly part of what we will hear from those in the region who are going to be critical of this move by the United States. Why now? Why do you think the United States and Israel chose this very moment? We know that they have been making the case for quite some time that Iran is as weak as it's ever been.
I'm not sure if it's such a scathing charge. It is a common charge that I'm hearing from leaders all across the Middle East, that this was a war of choice, that the U.S. and Iran were in the midst of negotiations. They just had a round of negotiations mediated by Oman, the Sultanate of Oman, and the Omani foreign minister, who has close relations with the United States. This is not someone who is considered an American enemy, said that this shouldn't have happened, that the negotiations were progressing well, and that, to quote him directly, he said to the United States, "Don't do this. This isn't your war." That is a sentiment that I've been hearing from several officials across the region. Why now? President Trump said that there was an imminent threat, that Iran was not willing to compromise on its nuclear program, and that it was working to develop long-range missiles that could eventually carry out attacks against the United States. Iranian officials have told me they are willing to negotiate on their nuclear program. Iran's foreign minister just told NBC News moments ago, before you took over in the chair, that they're willing to negotiate on the nuclear program. Iran has said many times that it does not seek a nuclear weapon. So the imminent factor is certainly in question and being questioned in this region. What people are saying is that this was something that Israel and the United States had long been planning to do, wanted to do, and took this opportunity because Iran is at its weakest stage in many years, because it faced a domestic uprising that the country brutally crushed, killing thousands of people, according to human rights groups, and because it has lost many of its proxy groups, many of the militia groups around the region that support Iran are not as powerful as they once were, groups like Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
All right, Richard Engel, please stand by for us. We will, of course, return to you throughout the course of this morning. We appreciate your bringing us that update. I do now want to bring in Jeremy Bash. He's a former chief of staff at the CIA and Pentagon and an NBC News contributor. Jeremy, thank you so much for sticking around this morning. Let me ask you to respond to what we have witnessed so far and, quite frankly, what we heard from the Iranian foreign minister. You heard the defiance there saying, why do this when the United States and Iran and regional partners were in the midst of diplomatic talks? What do you make of the timing of this massive military strike against Iran, Jeremy?
Well, ever since our data miner alerts have been popping off since about 1 a.m. Eastern, we've seen Iran's retaliation against these U.S. and Israeli coordinated strikes against Iranian territory. Look, I think several things make this different, Kristen. First of all, the size and scale of American military action is much larger than we've seen before from the Trump administration. The Maduro operation, Midnight Hammer, those were largely one and done. And this is an extensive, coordinated, probably multi-week campaign undertaken. Second is Iran has chosen to fire weapons around the region. And that's politically risky because it brings in the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, and other countries into this conflict. Third, the coordination between the United States and Israel is fairly unprecedented. We've never seen before the United States actually stationing F-22s and KC-46 tankers in Israel proper and having this attack be so clearly coordinated between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. And then finally, Kristen, I think the real difference here are the objectives. President Trump made very clear in his statement from Mar-a-Lago this morning that the objectives are to deprive the Iranians of having a ballistic missile program, to deprive them of having a nuclear enrichment capability, and fundamentally regime change. We've never had that overt statement from a United States president, which is we're using the military to engage in regime change in Iran. Unclear whether or not any of these actions will be able to come to fruition. We'll only have to see over the next several weeks how they unfold.
Jeremy, let me follow up with you on that point, because President Trump seemed to make the case that there would be this military offensive, this air military offensive launched by the United States and Israel. And then he had this message to the people of Iran that it is their moment to stand up, to depose the government. He said, basically, seize this moment. You might not get another one. And he was asked, the Iranian foreign minister, by Peter and Laura, if the Iranian government was effectively still intact. The top officials, he said, to the best of his knowledge, yes, they were. Just how challenging is that from an operational standpoint for the Iranian people, the Iranian military guard, to, at this point, effectively rise up against the government there? Is that a realistic ask by President Trump?
Well, assuming the United States and Israel have pristine intelligence, we probably could launch a decapitation strike, and so could Israel, against Iranian leaders. And the foreign minister said on your air just a little while ago that the Ayatollah is alive, as far as I know, which wasn't exactly a vote of confidence. But even if those leaders are taken out, that doesn't actually mean that regime change will necessarily follow, because, of course, you can change the regime, but what comes in its place? There'll be IRGC elements vying to take power. There'll be other militias trying to take power. Other regional players will want to go in there. And unless the United States is engaged in boots on the ground, and I don't foresee that at all, it's going to be very hard to just let the Iranian people take over and have democracy flourish. So I think the United States is going to have a strategy if it truly wants regime change in Iran.
And to that point, we did just see regime change in Venezuela, Jeremy. This is a completely different ballgame. Is it fair to say that? It is far more complicated to bring about regime change in a country like Iran.
Yep, and Maduro's deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, is still in charge in Venezuela, so I'm not even sure I'd call that regime change.
Okay, important point. And as always, we appreciate your perspective and your insight. Jeremy Bash, thank you so much for being here this morning. I now want to bring in Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey. Senator Kim, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the world was watching and bracing for this moment. And so now here we are. The United States and Israel have launched this military attack against Iran. Based on my conversations, Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, saying he is bracing for this to be a military operation that lasts for days and potentially weeks. What is your reaction to what has unfolded so far?
Well, this is an appalling action by this president, and to see something like this that goes so clearly against the will and the desire of the American people is something that should be shocking for all of us. Trump is trying to normalize his ability to be able to take military action anywhere in the world and to be able to just actively and publicly flaunt his efforts against the Constitution of the United States. This is something that we need to stand up against, and I believe that we need to have Congress reassemble as soon as possible this weekend to be able to vote on the War Powers resolution to show that this is not something that the American people want.
Well, I want to get to Congress's role in just a moment, but what are your biggest concerns, Senator?
Well, I worked on issues in the Middle East when I worked at the Pentagon. I was 15 years ago in Afghanistan as a civilian embedded with the military. I've seen with my own eyes the problems that arise and the tragedy that ensues when our country goes into war. And that's Trump's word. He said it's a war without strategy, without proper consideration of what the American people want. This is a protracted, open-ended conflict that Trump just started with the objective of regime change. This is giving us nightmares and flashbacks to 2003 Iraq War, and we saw where that led us with the lives lost and so much resource wasted. This is something that right now more than ever, when I did a town hall, I asked people there, who here wants to see U.S. military action against Iran? No hands were raised. I asked who here believes that the American people's voice needs to be heard if this moves forward. Every hand was raised. The president is so far out of touch with the American people, and I worry that this is going to be something where it's our service members that bear the brunt of it, not Donald Trump, and that's something that we have to make sure we're holding accountable.
Well, you and others are calling for Congress to come back for a vote on the War Powers resolution. President Trump, though, argued there was an imminent threat that required the United States to take this action. You heard him lay out the case in his State of the Union address, effectively saying that Iran's trying to develop a weapon that could ultimately hit the United States. Does the president need to have the authority to be able to act if there is an imminent threat that he perceives?
I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. There has been no notification to us of any imminent threat. What we see just with this president is he's willing to say anything to be able to just justify his actions. Just last year, he said that the Iranian threat was obliterated. He said that they were decimated by his actions, and now we're hearing something completely different. If there was such an imminent threat, why didn't we engage in further diplomatic efforts beyond what we saw? Right now, what we had was Witkoff and Kushner engaged in these just a handful of talks. Meanwhile, they're also the same diplomatic team that's in charge of Russia and Ukraine, on Israel, Palestine, and the greater Middle East peace. I mean, if this was so important, don't send a part-time diplomatic operation forward and then say that it failed after a couple of days and then move forward on these unprecedented strikes without congressional approval. Again, this is not just about concern over which branch of government's engaging. This is about actively going against the will of the American people, and that is something that he needs to be held accountable for.
Do you believe that there would be enough support to pass the War Powers resolution? Republicans control both chambers of Congress, Senator.
Well, look, being there at the State of the Union or last week, there is certainly real concern about how this Republican leadership and the Republican-led Congress is just doing whatever Trump's bidding is. I've often said it doesn't feel like we have three branches of government anymore, as we have just one branch of government trying to dominate the other two. That being said, we should be on the record. And the American people deserve to hear what their representatives believe and whether or not they support what I believe is an illegal, unconstitutional war. And again, war was the word that Trump used. He is actively saying we are at war with these major combat operations, looking for regime change. Is that really something that the American people are waking up today and saying that is the priority of America? Absolutely not. They're worried about affordability. They're worried about high costs. They're worried about our own communities, not about Trump asserting himself in this way as an imperialist president.
Senator, let me ask you about the broader argument that Iran poses a threat to the United States. It has been called a state sponsor of terror. What do you make of the fact that in these negotiations, according to administration officials, Iran was not negotiating in good faith, was not saying, as the president argued, the magic words that it would in fact abandon its nuclear weapons program? Does that not concern you, putting aside the idea of congressional authority? Do you not think that Iran needs to be defanged in that way?
I worked for years trying to counter Iranian terror in the region, so I know this firsthand, and I certainly take that threat seriously. But that doesn't give, and I think this is important for the American people to understand, just because they are named a terror group does not give Trump the authorization. Even after September 11th, we needed congressional authorization to be able to use force against a terror group that we had identified. We also identify North Korea as a state sponsor of terror. Does that mean that Donald Trump can unleash on his own an area assault of this magnitude against North Korea? We know and understand that is not something that one person in this country of 330 million people is able to do, and especially when it puts service members in harm's way. If we enter into a conflict without strategy, we saw where that led. It led to decades of problems, as we saw in Afghanistan, lives lost, thousands of lives lost. And after that, I can't imagine any American would want to see us push forward in this way without strategy, without the resources dedicated to our service members. And so I feel very strongly about this. Yes, they are a threat, but if that's the case, then put the entirety of America unified together against it with a strategy. But again, that is not what Trump's pushing. And right now, the American people do not buy and do not support what this president is doing.
Senator, let me ask you about the overall goal. The president said that the operation ultimately is for regime change. Just bottom line, do you support regime change in Iran?
I do not support this president's actions in trying to unilaterally do that. I think that is up to the Iranian people, and we have seen full force what can happen in these types of circumstances. Again, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen these efforts of America trying to impose regime change on their own, and the backlash as well as the result of it. This is a circumstance, when you look at it very clearly, where, for instance, the IRGC Quds Force could very well use this as an opportunity to seize control, putting the power in even more dangerous hands than what we see right now. So, this is something where the president can't just take strikes and then cross his fingers that things are going to work out. Lives are on the line. And if he's fomenting this type of popular uprising, what is he going to do? What is this president going to do if we see another massacre of Iranian protesters as we saw earlier this year? Is that going to just further and prolong American involvement? And to what end? I see no way in which this president has thought through how we exit this type of war that he has started.
Well, let me ask you, because the administration is arguing, look, it can bring about regime change without putting U.S. boots on the ground. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think that it's possible to bring about regime change? You heard the president's message today to the people of Iran that it's their moment to rise up once the bombs stop falling and to bring about regime change on their own. Do you think that that is a possibility? I understand that you're opposed to this operation writ large, but I'm asking you about whether you think it's possible that, in fact, this could be carried out without U.S. boots on the ground.
Well, we saw with the Maduro operation, this president has forced regime change, and certainly with strikes against leadership in Iran, it could very well, just by virtue of the strikes and targeting, could create an opening there. But again, To what end? Will it actually bring about a regime that is going to be better for the security of America? Can we assure that? Can this president look us in the eye, the American people, and say, I can guarantee that whatever regime does come in or leader come in, that was better for the United States? He cannot, in good faith, make that guarantee to the American people. And I have just seen too much of hubris in White Houses of past, and this one in particular, that thinks that they can just dictate and control situations all over the world. And often what happens is that it's the American service members, our military, that pays the price for the hubris of an American president. And I worry that that is something that this president is doing. And without Congress engaged in this, I believe that we are abdicating our responsibility. And I urge yet again that we convene immediately to be able to take up the voice of the American people and bring that into this conversation, because that is what is missing. I've heard a lot from Trump, but he needs to hear from Americans.
Let me ask you, if the president makes his case to Congress, to the American people, is there a universe where you could support this operation if it were to come up for a vote, Senator?
Well, look, it's too late for that. This is a situation where he has already undertaken an unconstitutional war. And again, war is his term. And so this is something where I am going to do everything I can to try to get Americans that are in harm's way right now out of it, to try to do my best in the same way that I have in the past. Even though I didn't support the 2003 Iraq war, I tried my best to be able to try to temper the circumstance and create the best scenario for American security. It is difficult, though, when the president has unleashed Pandora's box. We know that things are now happening that are irreversible. So the question is, what comes next? I will work diligently to try to fight for the security of service members and the American people, as I have my whole career.
All right, Senator Andy Kim, thank you so much for being with us, giving us your perspective this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
As some stations leave us, we do want to pause for a second to allow others to join our ongoing coverage of the breaking news overseas of the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. And good morning once again. It is 10 a.m. on the East Coast. We are following that ongoing breaking news overseas with the U.S. and Israel striking targets within Iran earlier this morning. Iran has begun to retaliate, targeting U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have also been heard in northern Israel and Dubai. I want to get right to our senior national security correspondent, Courtney Kube, who has been tracking this for days, if not weeks. Courtney, you've been all over this since the first bombs were dropped. Give us a sense of your key takeaways, the size and the scope of this military operation so far, Court, and what it says about how long it might last.
Yeah, so I think that the biggest indicator of how long this might last and the scope of it is President Trump's video himself, right? We were expecting that the U.S. might take some sort of strikes against either the nuclear facilities or perhaps the ballistic missile program. But President Trump laid out some really lofty goals here for what he hopes that the U.S. military action here, in conjunction with the Israelis, will accomplish. So, yes, it is to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear missile or nuclear program. It is, yes, to destroy their ballistic missile program. That in and of itself is an enormous undertaking, Kristen. Also, he said that they intend to annihilate the Iranian Navy. Again, another large undertaking. Finally, he also said that once they put these conditions in place, the Iranian people need to rise up and meet this rare opportunity. So regime change also appears to be on the table here. All of that together is an enormous undertaking for the United States military. That signals that this is not a days, maybe not even a weeks-long campaign. Now, we have watched the military bring in this enormous armada at sea, aircraft on land, and then other additional capabilities, including just basic logistics that are needed for a sustained campaign. He has in place right now what he needs for a campaign to last several weeks. But one of the biggest factors here is the defensive piece. So not the offensive strikes, but being able to defend against the retaliation from Iran, which we are already seeing begin. We heard from the Iranian foreign minister last hour. He made it clear that they see this as self-defense because this was a preemptive strike by Israel and by the United States against Iran, and that there is no indication that Iran is going to let up. Now, at this point, the indications that we have about these Iranian strikes in Israel, they appear to be so far relatively unsuccessful in that we don't have any indications of casualties or destruction of infrastructure. Again, this is unfolding. It is ongoing. So everything right now is very much a snapshot in time. That's the same for the Iranian attempts to hit U.S. bases in the region. We know that there have been at least 5 locations where they have attempted to target U.S. installations in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar. In what am I forgetting? There's several others. So the one that we know so far that has been successful in that it was able to get through air defenses was in Bahrain. But at this point, we don't have any indication of any Americans who were injured or killed. But again, that's a snapshot in time. Another place that we know that they have already tried to strike is in Jordan. That is significant because the U.S. already had a military presence in Jordan. We heard a lot about Tower 22 after a drone strike there several years ago, but the U.S. has brought in additional assets, including strategic aircraft in recent days and weeks. So there was an attempt to launch missiles at Jordan, but the Jordanian officials are saying that those were intercepted. They were struck down. Kristen, I think we should expect to see these sorts of attempts against both Israel, against U.S. installations and facilities in the region, as long as this conflict continues. And again, this is now looking to be more of a sustained campaign than a quick one and done or direct attack.
All right, Courtney Kube, stand by for us with all of your great reporting. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to NBC's chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, who joins me from Dubai. There have been explosions there throughout the morning and overnight hours. Keir, what are you watching? What's the latest there?
Hey, Kristen. Yeah, I'm hearing those explosions now. We're in Dubai. We're in the house. And my family are in the house primarily because what we're mostly hearing from these explosions are interceptions of missiles. So what you don't want to do is find yourself accidentally underneath the debris from an interception like that. And it is an illustration of what Courtney was saying there, which is that things are really unpredictable. We're in the first hours of this, but Iran has short and medium range missiles, at least in principle, enough to keep this going for some time. And so really, in a way, you could argue they only need one to get through to cause serious panic. Another piece of news, Kristen, just while I have you, I'm told by a senior diplomat that, in fact, just to expand this out, that, in fact, the Iranians did send missiles to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh and to Dammam Air Base, or in that vicinity. Those two were intercepted, but that now adds another regional actor, a major country, Saudi Arabia, to the mix here in terms of potential responses. And the Saudis have put out a statement saying that they have the option of responding to the aggression of Iran. It just illustrates the ways in which this isn't under President Trump's control entirely at this stage. And then just one other point, we're watching closely the Strait of Hormuz, where, of course, as we've said many times, Christian, that's a choke point where 20% of the oil and gas passes through for the world. That could have an impact on oil prices if Iran starts to try to close that down. What one diplomat in the region told me, after this bombardment that we're suffering in many of the countries where I am in the Gulf, that could be the second wave to try to close the Strait of Hormuz. And then how does the US and Israel respond to that? And how does the region respond to that? I mean, these are some of the factors, you know. As long as there has been war, it's been a truism, Kristen, that, you know, things start to change as soon as the first shots are fired. And that will be true here too. Not everything is President Trump can't plan for everything.
Keir, you're touching on, I think, one of the seminal points and the seminal questions that we all have right now. Vice President J.D. Vance said there's absolutely no way that strikes against Iran would lead to a prolonged conflict in the Middle East. President Trump was asked about that on Friday, and he said basically there are no guarantees. You are touching on the possibility that this could become a wider regional, more sustained, more prolonged conflict. Talk about just how dicey this situation is, how much of a razor's edge it's on.
Yeah, look, sorry to be blunt about it, but President Trump is right to say there are no guarantees, and Vice President Vance is wrong to say that there's no way that this leads to a regional war. It might not. There's an enormous amount of firepower ranged against Iran by the US and by Israel, and they will be doing all they can to take out the Iranian missiles and to prevent, for example, Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz. But again, the issue is there is debris landing here in the United Arab Emirates, as Courtney was talking about, in Bahrain. There is a real risk that something gets through and escalates this, spins this into a different kind of regional and international crisis. I mean, I think the one thing I would say, Kristen, is that when the President Obama signed the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, one of the complaints in this region was that it said nothing about the missiles, the Iranian missiles. Well, in a sense, you could argue President Trump just ripped off the Band-Aid, and we are now seeing the extent of those missiles and what the region is going to have to suffer. And maybe we'll find it's not as frightening and as threatening as people feared. Or maybe we won't. These are unpredictable hours.
These are unpredictable hours. So well said. Keir Simmons, thank you. Stand by for us. We appreciate your reporting from Dubai. I now want to bring in Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska to respond to all of this. Congressman Bacon, thank you so much for joining us. Basically, we're seeing the divide in your party play out right now. I want to read you what Senator Lindsey Graham said. He said this operation has been well planned. It will be violent, extensive, and I believe at the end of the day, successful. Freedom for the long-suffering Iranian people, he says. Here is former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. I did not campaign for this. I did not donate money for this. I did not vote for this in elections or Congress. This is heartbreaking and tragic, and how many more innocent will die? Congressman, where do you stand? How do you see this?
Well, I hope Senator Graham is right. But I will acknowledge war is unpredictable. You don't know, it's high risk. And so this is a high risk operation. But I lean on the side of Senator Graham here because I've been on the receiving end of Iranian terrorism strikes. I've lost good friends. Iran has been waging war against us since 1979. Their first big terrorism hit was in Beirut, 1983. We lost hundreds of Marines. And we've seen these kind of strikes from Iran, the IRGC in particular, all the way through. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was when the regime kills approximately 50,000 Iranians in these protests. And I think from a humanitarian point of view, the free world's got to stand up and say this is unacceptable. But I'll be the first to say it's high risk, unpredictable. But the world, I think the world cannot coexist with the Ayatollah and his regime and the threats that they pose to all of us.
Senator Lindsey Graham says this could be a conflict that lasts for days, if not weeks, potentially longer than that, Congressman. Are you okay with that? Do you support a military operation of that size and scope?
I hate to see it, but if that's what it takes to take down this regime, I do think there's a large underground movement that we're working with. I think the Israelis are very attuned. The Israelis have incredible intelligence on the ground. So I have no doubt we're working with opposition leaders in Iran. Well, and they're going to need our air power support to help weaken the army and the police trying to suppress these protesters. And I think this is how this operation is designed. Go after the leadership, weaken the army and the police's ability to tamp down on these protesters and help the protesters take over. I think that's the design of this operation. I hope it's successful. And I pray for our men and women in uniform that that we don't have casualties. But it's high risk, but I think it's overdue. We have lost probably around 2,000 Americans to IRGC terrorism strikes since 1979. We lost 609 Americans alone in Iraq from these Shia militias. And I felt like back then we should have done something then. Why should Iran kill American soldiers so freely that they did, and we didn't do anything? And so this bill is due, and it's time that we pay it on the regime.
Well, I want to go back to something that you said, which is you hope that the protesters take over. It seems like that was what President Trump was arguing for. He had that very strong message to the people of Iran. He said, now is your moment to effectively overthrow your government. Is that realistic? How complicated is that? And who would replace the Ayatollah?
Well, there's a pretty large underground network within Iran, and they've been in contact with me over the years, wanting to get rid of the Ayatollah and replace him. Again, Kristen, this is high risk. It's unpredictable. That's why war should be the case of last resort. If you read Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, Jomini, war is unpredictable, and bad things happen. All I can say is Iran has been at war with us since 1979. They've been waging war against our country, our allies, since 1979, and we have not really responded. And I think this response is overdue. And it's time to have it out and try to destroy this regime.
The administration believes it is possible, has made the case it's possible to overthrow the Iranian government without U.S. boots on the ground. Congressman, given that you understand what is required in these types of military operations, do you think that's a realistic assessment? Can this be done without U.S. boots on the ground?
I think it's high risk. It's not guaranteed that it can get done, just to be honest about it. I hope it can be done. Hope is not a good strategy. All I can say is there's probably a lot more work going on under the surface that we don't know with the remnants within Iran right now. So I'm sure we've been in high-level contact with folks within Iran, and I will tell you, the Israelis know what's going on in Iran better than the Iranians do. You could tell today we struck a meeting with a high-level leadership in Iran. How did we know they were there? Well, it was Israeli intelligence that helped us. So I believe there's a lot more connections that we know that we don't know about, that they're there. And that's what we're going to try to leverage to overthrow this regime and let the people. But our dream is a free Iran that's at peace with its neighbors and an Iran that does not have nuclear weapons. That's our vision.
Congressman, does President Trump need to make his case to the American people? Right now, there are no plans for him to address the country today. Does he need to make his case to the United States?
I believe he does. He should make his case to the United States, to the citizens, but also to Congress. I'm generally supportive. I think this has been long overdue. I wish previous presidents would have taken this action, frankly. But it's by law, he should come to Congress now, tell us what the plans are. I was a little reluctant to do that before the strikes because you don't want to give away surprise. But we have a system here where Congress is an equal branch of government, and he should come and make his case and talk about what the future plans are. What are the objectives? I've always knew there was a fork in the road. Is he going to go after nuclear weapons, or is he going to go after regime change? Two totally different targeting strategies. And we can tell today it's regime change.
Do you think to that point, I don't know if you heard my conversation with Senator Andy Kim, but he is calling on Congress to come back on Monday. He says that it is time for Congress to vote on the War Powers resolution, to have a say, to demand that Congress have any oversight over any more military action in Iran. Do you agree with him? Does Congress need to come back? Is it that urgent and hold a vote on the War Powers resolution?
We're going to be back on Wednesday. And, I guess I got mixed feelings about what Senator Kim is saying. He's been a friend. I've worked with him. I do think the president should come to Congress and say, well, here's the objectives. Here's the plan. I think if these are sustained operations, we should vote on a War Powers resolution. I would be inclined to vote for it, to support the president. But Congress should maintain its authorities. And also, the president has a stronger hand when Congress gives their support to operations. It gives him more legitimacy. So instead of the president fearing congressional involvement, he should embrace it, because when we support him It gives them the authorities. It gives them the legitimacy of these operations. And as I mentioned, Kristen, I'd be inclined to support it because I've had good friends killed by this Iranian regime.
And Congressman, just very quickly, and just to be very clear, have you gotten any type of briefing, warning, heads up from the administration at this point? I know that they did brief the Gang of Eight, of which you are not a part, but was there any wider outreach to Congress?
No, but I do know they've briefed some of our chairmen. I think it was on Wednesday morning before we left. And so like our chairman of the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, so it wasn't just the Gang of Eight that have been briefed. There's been a lot more, or more down to the chairman and ranking member level, but I have not. And I anticipate getting briefed this coming week.
And one more finally before I let you go. Iran has obviously already started to retaliate against U.S. bases in the region. Are you surprised by the speed with which Iran has retaliated in this instance, Congressman?
No, I think we've been tipping our hand with all the Navy units and the Air Force movements. Iran has had time to come up with their plans. They have 1,000 ballistic missiles that can strike. And so they're a very dangerous adversary for our air bases, our Navy bases, and our allies. But you can't be blackmailed. You can't be extorted by Iran. So this is, so I'm not surprised.
All right. Congressman Don Bacon, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your perspective on this breaking and developing story. We really appreciate it. I want to get right to NBC's White House correspondent, Monica Alba, who is monitoring the developments for us from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Monica, in talking to your sources there and on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, what's the reaction been so far?
Well, Kristen, we are learning a bit more and some additional details about how some of the preparation took place here for this massive, in the words of President Trump, an ongoing campaign now, these strikes in conduction and in collaboration and conducted with Israel. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio did brief the Gang of Eight for more than an hour on Tuesday ahead of the State of the Union address and that speech. And remember that in that speech, which could have been an opportunity, Kristen, as you were just discussing with the congressman, for the president to potentially make his case to the American people for why he might take military action. He did talk about Iran. He did say that essentially he didn't want Iran to be able to continue with its nuclear capabilities, but he didn't go into much detail. Again, we don't know if he might decide now to do that or when he might do that. And in the days since then, we know that when he was asked about this possibility, he said that he wasn't happy with Iran, that he was continually briefed by some of his top national security advisors. It was just a couple of days ago, Kristen, that you had Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, his special envoy for the Middle East, in Geneva, participating in talks to see if diplomacy could be reached, and in an effort to continue to see if they could advance that diplomatic path. You had the foreign minister of Oman, who was meeting with Vice President Vance just 24 hours ago. That's the photo you're seeing there on your screen here in Washington, where they had a conversation that, according to the foreign minister, he felt it was productive. He said coming out of that he believed that peace could be reached, that a deal could potentially be in the next couple of days. Obviously, now this morning, he has issued a statement saying that he is dismayed with this action that the United States has taken. We haven't gotten any kind of reaction or response from Vice President Vance for his part, beyond telling a reporter with the Washington Post in the last couple of days that he believed even if the president decided to go forward with military action, he said there was, quote, no chance that this could become a drawn-out, wider regional war or conflict that would initially really involve the U.S. for years to come, laying down that marker. But when the president was talking about this yesterday, he said something a little bit different, saying that certainly if he decided he was going to act and pursue this military action, that there's always the risk of a wider entanglement and that there's always the chance that that could happen here. And now that we are in that conversation, Kristen, I think it's really notable just to remind viewers that the president is somebody who, when he was a candidate, campaigned on ending, quote, forever wars and ending additional foreign entanglements. And this is now the 6th military action that the president has taken since taking office in his 2nd term. And again, we don't have any plans to hear from the president in the immediate coming hours. It's always possible that that could change, as he does remain down in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he does have the ability to monitor all of this in real time, and where I'm told he is continually being briefed by his top aides. Kristen.
Monica, before I let you go, fantastic reporting there from the White House. What are your sources telling you about the diplomatic process? Is it possible that it can get back on track in any way, shape, or form, or is it effectively dead for now, given this strike?
Yeah, and remember last summer when the president did strike those nuclear sites in Iran, it was in the midst of ongoing negotiations and talks about that exact issue. And eventually those did get back on track, and we have seen them play out over the last few weeks and months. So it's possible, but it doesn't seem like there's any immediate chance for that, given that I am also told by a White House official what you have been reporting and what you've been talking about all morning, which is this idea that this is not an isolated hours-long strike or campaign, that this is more of a days-long effort and potentially could be even longer than that. Remember, it was just about a week ago where there was reporting that the president was also considering in a menu of options just a limited or a more targeted or tailored strike to get Iran potentially to pressure the regime into some kind of a deal. Obviously, that is not the decision that the president ended up taking, again, with this seeming to be a larger undertaking, and the president himself saying that. I think one other thing, Kristen, that the president mentioned in his video overnight is this acknowledgement, this idea that he says American heroes could be lost in this conflict, that there could be the death of U.S. service members, which is an absolutely important and significant comment from the president. And he did, we should point out, call this a war, saying that is what happens in war. And so certainly this is now a White House that is facing, I think, increasing pressure to lay out more to the American public about why the president made this decision and what happens next.
It's so important that you point that out, Monica. I think that comment by President Trump stood out to so many people. Just striking to hear him acknowledge that, yes, there may be U.S. casualties here. Monica Alba, with your great reporting from the White House, thank you so much for joining us. Just a short time ago, my colleagues Peter Alexander and Laura Jarrett spoke with Iran's foreign minister about the strike. Here's a little bit of what he had to say. Take a look.
We are facing an act of aggression, and obviously we have every right to defend ourselves. So what we are doing is act of self-defense, which is absolutely legal and legitimate. So, and we think that we are fully prepared for that, even more prepared than previous time, the 12-day war. And I believe we managed this. We know very well how to defend ourselves. We learned lots of lessons from the previous war, and we will certainly teach the aggressors a lesson they deserve.
With that, I want to bring in NBC's Yasmin Vesuvian. Yasmin, what do you make of what we heard from Iran's foreign minister, defiant there with Laura and Peter, not surprisingly?
Not surprisingly. I think it's important to understand the Iranian perspective here. And for them, the aggression that they're seeing from the United States and Israel with the ultimate objective of regime change is not justification for a war. In fact, they see it as a violation of international law. The Iranians felt as if, and as we heard from the foreign minister there, they were engaged in incredibly sincere and consistent negotiations when it came to the nuclear negotiations that were going on with Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and hence were subsequently caught off guard by this attack because of those ongoing negotiations, which we remember there was a statement that came out of those negotiations late Thursday saying they were going quite well. But of course, then there was a turn of course, and there was reporting indicating that the president was not happy with what was coming out of those negotiations so far. Hence why it seems as if the foreign minister is now obviously and understandably defending their right to defend themselves as a country against both Israel and the United States in a state of war, because it seems very much they are now at war with one another. I think the question is how they do that. We've already seen kind of a swift response so far, but Kristen, I think what gave the United States and Israel so much confidence in this most recent attack is what we saw take place over the last summer. And I bring that up only to say that over the last summer, Iran's talk was a heck of a lot bigger than their actual bite. And it seemed as if they didn't have the capabilities militarily to pull off what they said they could pull off. And I think the Israelis, it seems, and the Americans are taking the bet that the same is happening now. And that's also combined with, again, and I keep reiterating this, Kristen, but I think it's really important to do, kind of the dire circumstances in which the country is currently in, being closed out from the rest of the world with these crushing sanctions and the economic instability that is inside that country. All of that together does not give them the resources that they would need to defend themselves adequately against the forces that are the Israeli army, the Israeli forces, and the U.S. forces as well, Kristen.
Well, and of course, the big question looming over all of this, Yasmin, is what is the Trump administration's ultimate goal? Is it, in fact, regime change? President Trump talked about that today. He said ultimately it's up to the Iranian people, which was an extraordinary statement. The foreign minister was asked about that as well. I want to play a little bit of that for you and get your reaction on the other side.
You cannot do regime change while millions of people are supporting these so-called regime. You just look at what happened in the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. We had altogether about 30 million people in the streets in all cities of Iran in support of the Islamic Republic and in support of the whole system. So you cannot, change this regime because it's supported by the people. Yes, there are also people who are complaining, but they are strong supporters of the regime, of the system at the same time.
So, Yasmin, when you hear that, underscores just how complicated regime change would be.
It's incredibly complicated. It would be a long, protracted war if, in fact, that is what both the United States want and the Iranians want as well. But I think it's also important to talk about the fact that you heard from the foreign minister that many of the people that were killed during those protests were, in fact, intelligence agents from other countries. That's not who they were, Kristen. They were Iranian citizens. It was a 7-year-old art student. It was a young couple with an 8- and 10-year-old that they left behind after being killed in these protests. It was a 28-year-old biotech student. It was an artist. It was a fruit seller. It was a geophysicist. These were Iranian citizens that felt as if their lives were up against a wall and they had no other choice but to flood into the streets of Iran, very well knowing their lives were at risk because they wanted regime change, Kristen.
All right, Yasmin Vesuvian, thank you so much for that in-depth reporting. We really appreciate it. As some stations leave us, we do want to pause for a second to allow others to join our ongoing coverage of this breaking news of the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Good morning once again. It's 10:30 in the morning on the East Coast. We are following that ongoing breaking news overseas with the U.S. and Israel striking targets within Iran earlier this morning. Iran has begun to retaliate, targeting U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have also been heard in northern Israel and Dubai. I now want to bring in NBC's international correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Tel Aviv, where there have been sirens going off throughout the morning. Matt, give us the very latest in terms of what you're seeing and hearing there.
Well, I can tell you what I'm hearing just now. You actually might have heard it yourself, is this blaring sound on my cell phone, which comes up. I don't know if you can see all of these critical alerts. This is how this goes here, Kristen. We hear an alert on your phone. You get a little bit of time, and then presumably, in almost all cases, but not in all cases, there's then a loud citywide alert broadcasting that you need to go to a shelter immediately. And that's where I find you right now, inside this shelter, inside our office building. The walls look boring and average, but they're actually quite thick. And if you can see behind me, Kristen, this, in theory, is going to be able to basically clean the air, filter the air, so that we can stay in here forever, even if there's a chemical weapons attack or poison gas presumably, will be able to survive here in the shelter. And it is in shelters just like this one, which in Hebrew are called a mamad, that you will find the vast majority of the population of Israel. Jewish, Muslim, Christian, all of them are going to be headed right here. And we've been heading here throughout the morning and all afternoon. And even from inside this fortified room, we can still hear the outgoing air defense systems intercepting some of these Iranian missiles. And we can hear those interceptions. And in fact, just a couple of minutes ago, we heard what sounded like the largest set of interceptions that we've had so far. Now, despite all of that, and even, despite what we were seeing last summer, last June, when we saw Iran attack over and over and over again, Israel for 12 days, there were 30 dead. So far today, we haven't heard of a single dead person here in Israel from those Iranian bombardments. We have heard that there is a boy who was injured here in Tel Aviv because of an Iranian projectile. It hurt his lower legs. There is apparently, or reportedly, another injury in the northern part of Israel in Haifa. But so far, considering the amount of firepower that the Iranians have thrown at this tiny state, there is very little to show in the way of casualties. The Iranians are reporting that dozens of people have been killed at a school that was hit by Israeli attacks or American attacks in just the past couple of hours. But so far, this three-ply system of air defense, the Iron Dome, which defends against sort of lower-level projectiles, David's sling, which is probably the one that's being used more frequently here, is supposed to be defending against longer-range, higher-altitude missiles, intercepting them further away. So we could really see this entire conflict go by and not see much in the way of Israeli casualties. But it's too soon to say that because we don't know exactly what Iran's capabilities are. The president and Israeli officials have said that over that 12-day war 8 months ago, they managed to deeply set back Iran's, not only its nuclear program, but its conventional weapons program, including its ballistic missiles, which was one of the things that Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to push into those Iranian nuclear negotiations. He was telling the Trump administration, that they needed to limit Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. That was one of the reasons why Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders were pushing so hard on the Trump administration to try to get their voices heard in those negotiations that had been ongoing until just a couple of days ago, until really just this morning when Israel and the United States launched that preemptive attack. But what we're seeing right now is a real moment of uncertainty. This could either really change the Middle East, or the United States and Israel could scale back their ambitions dramatically. Now, so far, we've heard both the president of the United States and Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, both of them calling on Iranian people to overthrow their own regime, to take the baton from the Americans and the Israelis and essentially finish the job against the clerics, against the Ayatollahs who now run Iran. Neither of them have said that they, the Americans or the Israelis, are planning on sending troops with the quote-unquote boots on the ground into Iran to effect regime change in person. That's not something that has been publicly stated. However, they are both clearly encouraging the Iranian people to do that job for them, and clearly one of the ambitions of this incredibly complicated, unprecedented military campaign between the United States and Israel against Iran is to effect regime change in Iran. It's unclear what that's going to lead to. The fact is that there is no organized, vocal opposition group in Iran that enjoys connections with other international countries and the international community. Most of the real dissidents who have a real international standing are outside of the country, and it's unclear whether or not somebody from the regime would be able to step in. All morning, we've been hearing from the Israeli media buzzing with speculation, and it is just speculation, that the Ayatollah Ali al-Khamenei was killed in these strikes, or at least badly injured, and that Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, was also killed. Now, as you saw, we heard from the Abbas Araghchi. He is the foreign minister of Iran, and he told NBC News in that exclusive interview just a few hours ago that both men are safe and that, quote, as far as I know, this is Araghchi talking, they are both unharmed or not dead. Now, that would fly in the face of the reports that we've been hearing now, but again, this is all speculation. NBC News cannot confirm this information.
Well, just one of the biggest outstanding questions. Where exactly is the leader of Iran? Is he still alive? And to your point, Matt Bradley, just how complicated regime change would be. Administration officials themselves acknowledging it's not a clear picture of who would replace the current leadership. Matt Bradley, please stay safe. Extraordinary to have your reporting from a shelter. We really appreciate it in Tel Aviv. I now want to bring in NBC's Raf Sanchez, who is standing by. And as we leave Matt Bradley, we hear those sirens start to go off again. Matt, let me go back to you. Tell me what you're hearing, Matt.
Well, this is something that we've been hearing all day long. Just about every hour, we've been hearing a set of sirens going off. The last time that we didn't hear much, the time before that, we heard a massive bombardment, huge sounds of interceptions or outgoing anti-air missiles. So again, I hate to say that this is becoming routine, but so far this morning, so far this afternoon, we've been hearing it constantly. As long as Israel's attacks against Iran continue, and as long as Iran continues to have the capability to strike back, we'll probably be hearing this sound for quite a while.
All right, Matt Bradley, please stay safe. We really appreciate your reporting. I do now want to go to NBC's Raf Sanchez. Raf, I know you have some new reporting about targeting Iranian officials. Raf, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Kristen, that's right. So we knew that Israeli warplanes targeted Iranian leadership during that initial wave of strikes. The Israelis targeting both Iranian leaders, also going after Iran's air defenses. We are now starting to get a little bit more detail about what exactly the Israelis were going after. In just the last few minutes, an Israeli military official saying that Israel targeted 3 gatherings of Iranian leaders. Now, we don't know exactly what those gatherings were, but we, of course, have had Iranian officials on high alert for this wave of strikes. It is very possible that you have been having councils of war happening in Iranian government buildings, in Iranian government bunkers. This official not saying whether Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was within those 3 gatherings, but is saying that they were going after both political and military leaders who were essential to Iran's decision-making and essential to its ability to wage war. Now, we know that the Israeli military is now in a battle damage assessment phase. They are looking at what they have struck, and they are trying to figure out exactly what kind of damage they caused. Iran, obviously, is not a transparent place. It is difficult to know exactly who's alive and who's dead. But Israeli intelligence, as we have seen over and over again, has extensively penetrated the Iranian government. And so you can bet that they will be working all manner of sources right now, signals intelligence, human sources, trying to understand to what extent they have succeeded in decapitating the Iranian leadership. Chris, and I'll also just tell you, in the last couple of minutes, we have heard from the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he has conducted a phone call with President Trump. You see him on your screen there. Of course, both leaders address their countries separately. They now, as far as we are aware, have spoken for the first time since the bombing began. Kristen, you may not be able to see it because the lettering on the bottom of our screen is covering it, but there is a book in front of Netanyahu on his desk there. It is not an accident that it's in that photo released by the Prime Minister's office. The book is called Allies at War, and it is about the effort of the US, the UK, the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany. And it is certainly not a coincidence that the Israeli Prime Minister has this book, Allies at War, in that photograph as the US and Israel begin this unprecedented campaign jointly against Iran. Kristen.
What a notable detail, Raf Sanchez, to bring us in that perspective from inside Israel. The concerns, Raf, about this becoming a wider war, what are your sources telling you about that, particularly given that we are seeing how quickly Iran retaliated?
Yeah, so Kristen, we are hearing from American allies in Europe, in NATO right now. They are stressing, first of all, that they were not involved in this attack. We don't know at this point whether the White House even gave them any serious heads up before launching this joint U.S.-Israeli campaign. They are deeply, deeply concerned about the rippling effects, about the potential for a regional war. You're seeing on your screen there just chaos in different cities across the broader Middle East. And while the battlefield is the skies and the seas and the territory of Middle Eastern countries, the effects here really have the potential to be global. We've been talking all day about the potential for the Strait of Hormuz, that critical waterway through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows, to be blocked. There is real bracing right now for volatility in the oil markets, depending on how this plays out. Real concern about the impact this could have on global shipping. You'll remember the Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen basically managed to strangle a significant section of global shipping by attacking merchant vessels in the Red Sea. There has been a ceasefire on that front for several months now, but there are deep, deep concerns that the Houthis in support of Iran will begin those attacks. And of course, Kristen, as we've been saying, air travel is in total chaos worldwide right now. Dubai's airport is one of the busiest airports in the world. It's a major, major hub, a major transit point. It is closed. It's closed indefinitely. And so countries all over the world have citizens who are stranded right now, unable to get home. So real global shockwaves being felt by this. Kristen.
All right. Raf Sanchez, thank you so much for your reporting. We really appreciate it. I now want to bring in former Defense Secretary in the first Trump administration, Mark Esper. Secretary Esper, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here and your perspective. Let me start off by just getting your reaction. Obviously, we've seen President Trump amass this huge military presence in the region. And here we are today, strikes underway that could last, based on my conversations, for days, if not weeks. What do you make of this?
Well, I was not surprised that it happened after yesterday when we heard that the U.S. ambassador to Israel gave his employees their authorization to leave immediately the state of Israel. That was a tip off there. And we also know that Kushner and Witkoff came out of the negotiations on Thursday with the Iranians, very close-lipped about it, which told me that there was not progress being made. And I think the president and his team made the right call, and that is that the Iranians weren't serious, at least not serious enough to give up their enrichment program. So in my mind, those few things, coupled with the fact that we had reached the apex of our deployment of air and naval forces in the Middle East, you can't keep them there forever, right? At some point in time, their readiness wears down. So it's one of these things you got to either use them or pull them back. And I think the president made the decision, given a number of other factors, some of which he laid out this morning in his remarks, that it was time to act.
Well, given your role as Secretary of Defense, you understand what it is like to think about, draw up potential battle plans, war plans. What is the best case scenario, Mr. Secretary, in this moment? And what is the worst case scenario as you see it?
Well, that's a good question. And of course, it begins with what's the purpose of the operations. And I think as the president laid out, he said we wanted to destroy their ballistic missile capabilities, production capabilities. So I assume that some of the sites that were taken out in Iran, internally to Iran, contain some of those sites, and they look familiar to me based on my recollections. But he also talked about going after their naval assets, and I assume that was to make sure that they couldn't harass commercial shipping or to mine the Strait of Hormuz. Interestingly, we haven't seen much of that. At least the reporting hasn't indicated any strikes along the coastal areas or against the Navy. We know that Israel went after leadership targets. That, of course, suggests that they want to go after decapitation. And then the president mentioned regime change. And I think here at what he's hoping for is that there'd be enough pressure on the Iranian regime that the people in Iran would rise up once again, just like they did last month, and maybe the conditions would be set, or maybe further on U.S. or Israeli attacks could set the conditions further for the Iranian people to overtake the country, the regime, and push them out of power. But again, the end game looks a little fuzzy right now. We just got to see how this plays out, Kristen.
To that point, Mr. Secretary, the president, the administration have indicated they believe it is in fact possible to bring about regime change without U.S. boots on the ground. Based on your understanding of these military operations, is that realistic? I understand the president's calling on the Iranian people to rise up, but it is incredibly complicated to bring about regime change, is it not?
It is. It's possible. It will depend on the Iranian people at this point in time. And I hope that we are providing covert means to support them. I mean, of course, we know we provided last month Starlink terminals to the Iranian people to communicate with one another. Maybe we're providing them other means and assets, but it's going to be up to them at this point in time. But look, I'd say beyond that, after Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we had the Iranians on their knees. Their air defenses were taken down. Their ballistic missile forces were spent. We had set back a considerable amount of time their nuclear enrichment process, their industry. In my view, that was the time to demand that Iran allow IAEA inspectors, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, back into the country to get back into those installations, to find where that 900 pounds of enriched uranium was, to put cameras back in place. And that didn't happen. And so there's uncertainty now. And I think the president is right. And every president before him, as long as I can remember, has said Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So whether or not there is regime change at this point in time, I think it was important to continue to set back their missile defenses, their air defenses, their missile capabilities, and to continue to set back also their nuclear ambitions. And we may have to keep doing that if we don't see regime change.
Can you put this moment into broader context and why the president may have decided to strike now? How weak is the Iranian regime in the wake of the strikes that you just cited last summer?
Yeah, they're the weakest they've been in 47 years, right? Since the 79 takeover and, of course, the American hostages, the weakest in that amount of time. And it's not just their air defenses have been decimated and their ballistic missiles spent. But in the broader regional picture, keep in mind that they've lost Hamas in Israel. They've been decimated by Israeli operations in Gaza. They lost Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They've been taken down pretty seriously by Israel. Syria has fallen. Now, of course, the regime under Bashar Assad. We know that the Iraqi Shia militia groups have been set back as well. And really, the only force standing are the Houthis in Yemen, and they're not a considerable force. But nonetheless, the point is the proxies that help prop up and defend this Islamic regime have been really taken down considerably. So it talks about weakness across the board, not just domestically, but with regard to the region and the proxies. So this is a unique moment in time in the 47-year history of this regime.
Let me ask you, because we did hear from President Trump, who delivered a video message earlier today. We've been playing that throughout the morning. Do you think, though, that he needs to come before the American people and really lay out his case in earnest?
Yeah, I think every president benefits by going before the American people and explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it, how long it will take, what the pros are, the cons, the risks. I mean, the president was right to mention that this is not a risk-free operation. We could lose Americans. So I think the more he could speak to that, to the American people directly, and I think we're being told he will today, but also to Congress, both the House and Senate, and then, of course, have his members of his cabinet go out and do the same. You know, when we took down Soleimani in January 2020, one of my jobs was to go out and call the respective members of the Armed Services Committees and explain to them what we were doing. And then later we went before the Congress in a closed-door session in both the House and Senate and explained the operations and what we were doing. So I think that's all part and parcel of what we do, what we should do. It seems like they plan on doing that as well, and I think those are all the right moves.
Secretary Esper, you read my mind. I was going to ask you about the operation taking out Qasem Soleimani, the decision to do that, the implications. Did it in some ways lay the groundwork for this moment?
I think it laid the groundwork in the sense that it showed that the Iranians aren't invincible, that we can do significant damage to them without suffering repercussions that maybe some expected. Soleimani was a singular figure within the regime, probably one of the 2 or 3 most important people in Iran, and his ability to maneuver and to enable proxy forces is remarkable. So taking him down was a considerable feat. And the fact that even though Iran responded, we didn't suffer any any deaths was remarkable. And then I think, of course, the operations by Israel and later the United States last June also showed that the regime was much weaker, much more brittle than what we expected. And then I might add again, what happened in January, just a few weeks ago, with the Iranian people rising up in every single province and chanting, death to the Ayatollah, shows you that this regime seems very brittle and almost on the verge of collapse. And the question will be, what will it take for that to happen? And you asked the question earlier, you're spot on. We can't necessarily do it. We might be able to set the conditions for that to happen, but it's really going to take the Iranian people to rise up and to take charge of their own country.
And Secretary Esper, do you think this moment is on the verge of a wider regional conflict, a protracted war? Vice President J.D. Vance said, no, that's not going to happen. But do you see that as a real possibility?
I don't think so in the sense of the Arab countries joining in. Of course, they thought that if they would not support U.S. operations or allow use of their oversight airspace, that Iran wouldn't touch them. And here we wake up this morning, we find out that Iran has struck nearly every Arab country in the region, whether or not they did that. So I think part of the Iranian ploy here is to try and get the Arab states involved, to kind of draw them in, maybe force them to put pressure on Washington, because it's clear that Iran doesn't have the sway with Trump that they thought he might, and the Europeans aren't getting involved. So maybe there's a diplomatic play through the Arabs, but I don't see them getting directly involved. The more precise answer to your question is, could this go on for an extended period of time? And the answer is yes, it could. Right now, I think, based on my quick read of the amount of missiles that Tehran has shot back, how they broaden out the scope of the military retaliatory responses, tells me that they think they're going to have to marshal their resources, that they see this happening for the long haul, and that they're going to hunker down, respond where they can, hunker down, respond where they can, and see how this situation plays out. Maybe the United States gets tired of the attacks. Maybe there's some type of diplomatic intervention by other countries. But I think they're going to play the long game and be more in a defensive crouch than they will trying to expand this conflict militarily.
All right. Former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen.
I now want to bring in former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Herzog. He is in Tel Aviv. Ambassador Herzog, thank you so much for joining me. We really appreciate it. I know tensions are running high right now where you are. Talk to me about your reaction to this joint military operation between the United States and Israel. How do you see it unfolding?
Well, hello from a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. We spent a lot of time here since the morning, on average, a few times an hour. The war just started. I think this is we are witnessing a joint U.S.-Israel operation, which was probably prepared for weeks, if not more than that. With the declared aim of both denying the Iranian regime strategic capabilities, especially nuclear and missile capabilities, and at the same time degrading the regime and hopefully hastening its demise. There's overwhelming support here in Israel for this operation. It just started, but I believe it finds the Iranian regime at a low point, the lowest that I can remember in recent history, perhaps since the Ayatollahs took over in 1979, and we'll see how this develops. Obviously, Iran responded with missile firing at U.S. bases in the region and at Israel. The volume of their barrages has not been very good, and I understand that as we speak, Israeli planes are hunting Iranian missile launchers, and I expect that with time they will be depleted.
Ambassador Herzog, were you surprised by how quickly Iran retaliated? Because in the wake of the last pinprick strike, if you want to call it that, by the United States, several hours elapsed before there was a response. In this instance, it seemed almost immediate. Was the United States prepared for that?
Yes, I think the Iranians were expecting this for a while. It was in the air that if negotiations fail, then the U.S. might strike. So if you're an Iranian, you sit in Tehran,
You raise the diplomatic process. Is there any hope that diplomatic talks can get back on track? Mr. Ambassador, there were supposed to be talks this coming week.
So I don't expect that to happen while, the guns are talking. The war is raging right now. Maybe in a while, when Iran is under pressure, we'll be willing to go back to the negotiating table with better terms, but I think that might take a while.
And President Trump has talked about regime change. He called on the Iranian people to stand up, to seize this moment. He said, you might not have another moment like this. Ambassador, is it realistic to think that this can be carried out, that ultimate regime change by the Iranian people?
Nobody expects to bring about regime change only through airstrikes. That obviously is insufficient. I think we all understand that. But the idea is to, among other things, to degrade the regime and send wave shocks into the Iranian system that will weaken the regime, empower the people, and ultimately hasten the demise of the regime. We'll have to see what happens. Many in Israel believe that it is no coincidence that the protests erupted in Iran mere few months after the 12-day war. There's some connection here, so we'll have to see if the current war also sends those wave shocks into the Iranian system, weaken the regime, and hasten its demise.
There has been some discussion about whether Iranian leadership survived the strikes overnight. Do you have any information about that, about their whereabouts? The Iranian foreign minister says, yes, they did, to the best of his knowledge.
Well, Israeli defense sources claim that Khamenei was probably hit in the strike as supreme leader, but it's not clear whether he survived, and that some other top leaders in Iran were hit and did not survive, like the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, like the head of their intelligence, and some other senior officials. But it's too early to tell. If indeed Khamenei was hit and taken out of the picture, I think this is a dramatic development. The guy's been leading Iran for 37 years, and he's been, controlling that system and dictating their policies. So it might not be a complete regime change, but definitely part of it, if indeed he did not survive.
Okay, Ambassador Herzog, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This has been an NBC News special report on the U.S.-Israeli strikes in Iran. For our NBC stations, we'll return you to regular programming. Coverage continues with Jose Diaz-Balart.